So I'm really glad to see you all, and I'm really excited about this session. And we're very happy to have spent time with many of you over the last week and have enjoyed the conference. I hope you all have stopped into a session or two and enjoyed and engaged. I am Jason Valcourt. I'm the conference coordinator, and this is our grand finale session. And tonight we are looking at the next 50 years of NOFA, and our session will be moderated by Liz Henderson. Before we get started, I am going to share my screen and make a couple of announcements. Hope you can see that well. So yes, we're looking at the next 50 years of NOFA, Elizabeth Henderson, and many special guests who Liz will introduce in a few minutes. We are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on this map and honor those whose land you now occupy. We will put this link into the chat for you to explore and enjoy and familiarize yourself with. We also list here a few ways to center racial equity in your own work, which is a focus of NOFA Mass at this moment. Basic Zoom etiquette here. You are muted upon entry, and at some point, if the host invites you, you can come off of mute to ask your question. But you are more than welcome to use the chat feature throughout the session. So please add questions, comments inside the chat and enjoy that as well. Want to remind you also, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available after the session. We'd like to acknowledge and appreciate our sponsors that make the conference possible and support the work of not only just the conference, but also of NOFA. We have various sponsors that we hope that you will frequent and enjoy, explore their products and their services. And again, we're very grateful for their ongoing support of our work here at NOFA. I want to remind you that our online auction is live and it is ending up at 9 p.m. tonight. So you have a little longer to get in on some of the amazing items in the auction. The link is here and we will put it in the chat as well. And lastly, please don't forget to visit our virtual vendors. And in our digital program book, you can visit with them through video that is embedded into the book. And you can watch their videos and enjoy their services and products as well. So here's a list of them. And also they are they're represented throughout our program book. So that is the end of my announcements. I am now very happy to invite and introduce Liz Henderson, a longtime NOFA member, founder, promoter, contributor, and many, many other things. So Liz, please take it away.
Good evening, everybody. I am delighted and honored to moderate this culminating session of the 2021 50th anniversary summer conference. It's extraordinary and wonderful that we can celebrate 50 years of building an organic community together. NOFA has meant a great deal in my life. after my husband, my dearest friend and high school sweetheart, died when a crazed driver crashed into our car, I needed to recycle myself and to find new purpose in life and a healthy way to raise our son. At NOFA conferences, I found a community of people who seek to explore our connections and live in harmony with nature and one another, and to live lightly on the land, and who generously share with one another what they discover. From my NOFA friends, not from any courses or universities, I learned how to farm using organic systems. And I'm so grateful that although no one in my family had farmed or gardened for many generations, I have been able to contribute to the flowering of family-scale organic farming and community-supported agriculture, and to the advocacy for policies and programs to transform the corporate industrial GMO monocrop food system. But before we celebrate, let us take a moment to express our frustration and grief together. Had our way of life and our ideas about the environment prevailed sooner, our soils might not be washing away. Many fewer people would be suffering from chronic diseases. All four of my elders, my parents and my husband's parents, might not have died of cancer. And the deaths from COVID-19 would not have fallen so heavily on low-income people of color. So armed with this consciousness, we go on to build a healthier future together and with our many allies. So please allow me to introduce three of the elders of NOFAland, Joey Klein, Kevin Engelbert, and Mike Merner, who will talk about organic in their lives. And then four people of younger generations, Jane Seneca, Steve Munno, Onika Abraham, and Iris Fen Gillingham, who will introduce themselves, answer questions from the elders, and then share their visions for the next 50 years. So please save your questions by writing them in the chat. We'll have time at the end for Q&A and for you to share your visions if you want to. So let me first pass the mic over to Joey Klein.
Hi there, I'm Joey. I started messing around with gardens back in 1968. I think I joined NOFA in 1974. I farmed vegetables up until a couple of years ago. I'm retired now. I was on the NOFA board, Vermont NOFA board, from 1980 to 1990. Reflections on the 50th anniversary of NOFA. Let's go back to 1971. I was just out of college. I had completed my senior year at Marlborough College with a plan of concentration focused on soil biology. I wasn't going to graduate school. I was joining the movement of my peers to resist the war machine, to defend the natural world and our precious planet, and to understand it all at the deepest level. Vermont, because of its scenic beauty and its live and let live attitude of its people, its proximity to East Coast cities, and available houses and farms to rent or buy, was a magnet for idealistic young people such as myself. The Vietnam War was dominating the news. Kids from our hometowns and college classes were getting drafted and killed in action or coming back wounded psychologically and physically. Ending the draft, ending the war, ending the madness of it all was a top priority. By the early 1970s, moving to the country and forming interlocking small groups of friends, communes, for mutual support was common. Organic farming seemed like a natural positive step that could be taken in the midst of this social chaos. We could heal ourselves and care for the ecosystem we are all part of. Among these groups, there always seemed to be a few who self-selected and were drawn to the garden and the barn. Growing and raising our own food as much as we could was our goal to start with. We were going to be organic. We had very little experience in this venture, being right out of college or the suburbs. There was a lot to learn from our Vermont neighbors and our friends on our neighboring hippie farms. The locals introduced us to the piles of rotting cow manure in the backyards of many small farms, which really powered our gardens. We brought truckloads of it and made good friends with our neighbors as we cleaned up their yards for them. We read Wendell Berry's Unsettling of America, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, Sir Albert Howard's An Agricultural Testament, F.H. King's Farmers of 40 Centuries, and of course, Organic Gardening magazine. Now were the sort of resources we drew upon. NOFA, right from the start, was in there as a community building organization. NOFA was the Grange of its day, mixed with SDS. It offered a revolutionary social context to encourage sharing among the homesteaders and farmers who had been quite isolated, but saw that they had potential impact on each other and on the greater society. We shared new ideas with each other to scale up our production and grew as organic producers to start feeding the growing number of people who wanted to eat organically grown food. This was burgeoning at the same time as our farming interests. NOFA was right there. Education of farmers and the general public is its role. NOFA went to work at this at many angles. Education of both farmers and the general public was essential. NOFA sold books, held summer and winter conferences, ran an important apprenticeship program, held on-farm technical conferences, brought farmers together to do a bulk order of hard-to-get organic fertilizers that weren't available anywhere else at the time. NOFA provided the organizational oomph for the farmers markets, and the writing of the organic standards was done under NOFA auspices by the farmers themselves, and the basis of that those standards still hold. NOFA had a long history of equal rights for women, and women have been in leadership roles right along from the get-go. Our coordinator, executive director have been women right through. Our mission statement called for the development of a new rural economy built around small farms. Actually, this wasn't new. It was trying to salvage the pre-existing small farm economy, but with a new twist, the organic. We began lobbying to convince the state of Vermont to buy more locally grown foods for schools and other institutions. And we also were urging action to preserve farmland, which was being gobbled up by development at a very fast rate. Many of these reforms have been really important, including the conservation of my own farm. We added our voice to the call of the folks calling for the reform of the national pricing of milk that has led to the failure of so many small dairies. The small farm advocacy group Rural Vermont grew from the early work of NOFA's legislative committee. Our voice as early adopters of organic farming in Vermont gave us a leadership role that translated into clout on the national level through our congressional delegation. I think what NOFA has achieved in laying the foundation for our current movement, for better food for all, and for a sustainable, non-destructive agriculture is remarkable. I feel good about the many hours spent traveling around and attending meetings all over the state, making new friends and pushing this cause along. It really wasn't about any individual heroes. We were working together and we were happy to get what help we could from each other. There's plenty more work to do. NOFA has proven itself and met many of its goals, but there's a lot more to get done in the time of crisis and climate that we're facing right now. NOFA continues to invite individuals to volunteer for a good cause and make friends along the way. And I'd like to close with a comment on the 60s and 70s from Abby Hoffman. We were young, we were foolish, we were arrogant, but we were right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. And now I'd like to pass the mic over to Kevin Engelbert, who was the first certified organic dairy farm. Kevin, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, as Elizabeth said, we're the first certified organic dairy in the US, and that's why I'm considered one of the elders, even though I look like I'm old enough to have been around 50 years ago. It was only about 40 or 41 years ago that I first got involved with NOFA New York. And I've never really had the opportunity to be involved much with all of the NOFAs, because as a dairy farmer for 30 plus years, I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, never missed a day. And that didn't leave much time for traveling or participating in much more than the local NOFAs. The only time that I really ever remember doing anything outside of NOFA New York with all the NOFAs was in 1991. Ian Wanacott arranged a meeting with a few of us, Jack Laser, Carl North, myself, and a few others. We met in Rowe, Massachusetts. And the message was this, the purpose was the same thing it was when I first started out at NOFA New York. How can we expand what we're doing and make more and more people aware of why organic food is what they should be eating? My own story begins in the late 70s when I graduated from college, came back to the main farm, and my dad was very progressive, was the first one to adopt any new technologies in the area. So he started using chemicals in the 40s after he spent some time at Cornell. And by the late 70s, we had reached a point where we were having a hard time growing crops. We couldn't keep our cows healthy. And we, in the summer of 79, I went to Federal Land Bank with my dad to borrow money to buy 20 bred heifers, because we couldn't maintain, as I said, we couldn't maintain our cow numbers. So we had a family picnic that summer, and I went up to my grandmother and thinking I was pretty hot stuff, that I had just borrowed 20,000 without any problem, and was told if I needed more, just let them know, and told her why we'd borrowed it. And she gave me a disgusted look and said, well, all I know is when your grandfather and I were running this farm, we had bred heifers to sell every year. So I stuck my tail between my legs, went back, started thinking about it, and that winter spent time looking over the books, and we were spending thousands of dollars a year on fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, and another $1,000 every month trying to keep our cows alive, and we weren't successful. So I realized then, from talking with my dad and other people, that there had to be a connection here. So we quit cold turkey, started farming organically. I'd heard about NOFA New York, contacted Pat Kane, who at that time was NOFA New York. She did everything for NOFA New York. And in January of '84, I said, I want to be certified organic because I want to start bottling our own milk and selling it as organic. Pat said, well, we don't have any organic standards for dairy, and I don't think anybody does. write down everything that you do, and we'll look it over and let you know. So I did. I wrote down all of our practices. What we were doing what my grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather had done. We started rotating crops again, started using cover crops, went back to cultivating. We started feeding cows instead of just ground up rock for minerals. We started feeding natural supplements. And Pat came down, looked at our farm. I showed her everything that we were doing. We were a lot smaller then. And she said, okay, you're organic. You're certified organic. Would you come and join us on our board and help us continue to refine these standards that you've written down? And so I did. I don't remember the exact years, but I was on the NOFA board for quite some time and helped refine the standards for dairy and beef. So that led me, when my sons took over in the middle 2000s, two of my sons came back to the farm, and they have since now taken over and they manage the farm. So I was on the National Organic Standards Board for 5 years, from January of 2006 to January of 2011. Learned an awful lot about the government and how it works, and became very disillusioned with what was happening. I think that NOFA New York is one of the few certifiers that does things right. If you drive by an operation that's doing organic hydroponics or organic CAFO, or they're importing organic quote unquote grain, those operations aren't certified by a NOFA. I've always been proud of the fact that NOFA has been the gold standard when it comes to certifying operations. And that's the biggest problem that we face today to try to continue to move forward, is the shopping that a lot of organic farms do to try to find a certifier that will let them do things that in their heart they know isn't correct and shouldn't really qualify as organic. So it's an organization that I've always been proud to be part of. My wife worked for NOFA New York for a number of years. She was the certification director for quite a few years, and then gradually weaned herself into less and less responsibility because she started a retail farm store, and where we sell our organic cuts of beef, veal, and pork. We also have organic chicken that is raised by one of our employees on our land. And we also divert some of our milk, and local processor comes and picks it up, and we sell our own line of organic cheeses. Plus she handles a lot of local products that she sources wherever she can from small family farms. And that's done really well. It takes up a lot. She's working harder than she ever has in her life, but she loves every second of it. So between shipping our milk to Organic Valley, my sons are now, we have a herd of about 250 cows right now. And we're managing nearly 3,000 acres of organic land. A good share of that is pasture and hay ground, but we also have 300 to 350 acres of corn, 100 to 200 acres of soybeans, depending on the weather. And then we grow oats and wheat and alfalfa and grass hay. So we have become a fairly large operation by organic standards, but we also do things properly. Because my wife worked at NOFA New York, we are certified by NOFA Vermont, a sister organization. So I'll close there and then open that up for if anybody has any questions. But that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And if you have questions for Kevin, please write them in the chat and we'll get to them after the presentations. And our next elder is Mike Merner from Rhode Island.
Yes, my name is Mike Merner from Earth Care Farm in Charleston, Rhode Island. It is probably best if I read the short report to you. If I just talk without a written guide, I might just start rambling on, reminiscing, and get off the path. First, I would like to sincerely thank and congratulate all those of you who have supported the work, mission. Are we having the difficulties?
It's just Kevin's mic.
Kevin, could you
Yeah,
turn
he's
off
got
your
it, he's
mic?
got it now.
Okay. All right, sorry. First, I would like to sincerely thank and congratulate all those of you who have supported the work, mission, and vision of NOFA over the past 50 years. Sometimes it feels to me as if there was some invisible inner divine guidance that brought us together to form NOFAs for the well-being of the earth. It is our collective respect for nature and our interdependence with nature that brought us together to begin this task. I am one of the founders of Rhode Island NOFA and had the honor of being its first president. As I look back, Rhode Island had it relatively easy to start a state chapter, thanks to the work of NOFA founders in the other New England states. Rhode Island was the last state in New England to form a state chapter, so we didn't have to start from scratch to decide what was meant by organically grown. The group of Rhode Island NOFA founders were not only farmers, but also gardeners, landscapers, environmental activists, educators, and other health-minded people. We simply received, reviewed, discussed, and debated the written organic standards from the other states. Then, with some minor little edits, we came up with our Rhode Island NOFA standards for what was required to be considered certified organically grown. For a year or two, Michael Varaca essentially worked as a volunteer to be our third-party private inspector, inspecting and certifying farms. The NOFA Rhode Island board realized that wasn't going to be financially viable in the long term. And since Rhode Island is such a small state, some of the board members went to our state division of agriculture and requested that the state division of ag take over the inspections using the standards we had adopted from the other New England NOFAs. The division of ag has been very supportive and wanted to help represent all forms of agriculture in Rhode Island. The state never diluted our standards and things went very smoothly. The standards were reviewed annually by a committee of NOFA board members along with representatives from the Division of Ag. The committee made small changes to the standards to improve them as we learned more. This was all long before the federal USDA became the authority for standards. As I look back at our efforts to define what is organic, it sometimes feels like we were trying to define something that defies definition. Most profound things in life are difficult to define. Of course, the vision and intention was to grow food without the use of chemical pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, genetically modified organisms, or iodizing radiation. This vision was to farm and garden in as healthy and sustainable a manner as possible, and to improve soil health for the well-being of future generations. I assume that this will still be the vision for the next 50 years, with new young members to be agents of global well-being. Although I'm a lifetime member of NOFA, my work in the organization was mostly in the first 7 or so years of its beginnings. There are many other original founders of Rhode Island NOFA that deserve credit. If I try to name them all, I may unintentionally leave someone out. Thankfully, new people are constantly interested in NOFA's principles. I am amazed at the commitment some people have made to the long-term efforts to do this work. I would mention Jack and Julie. We all owe them a big thank you for steering the ship. Looking toward the next 50 years of NOFA, there will undoubtedly be endless ongoing debates on what is meant by the term certified organically grown. I am in the camp that believes that soil is the digestive tract of the plant, and if we do all we can to improve the soil, all else will fall into place nicely. I do like and identify with the slogan, keep the soil in organics. To me, it is the microbial life in the soil and the invisible life force that is important. The life in the soil benefits all of us. I am skeptical about hydroponically grown food and wonder if it can be as nourishing as food grown in healthy soil. However, I leave the door open for younger people and future generations to figure that out. They will receive their own inner guidance on what growing methods best serve the world as a whole. In closing, Liz asked me to think about a question for young organic farmers. My question would be, how do you think you can leave things better than when you found them? I ask that because I think we are supposed to enjoy life. And the main way I've found to enjoy life is to try to make improvements, sometimes small ones and occasionally big ones. But any improvement is beneficial to us all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask the younger generation people to introduce themselves briefly, say a few words about their lives and their relation to organic farming and NOFA. And then we'll get to the questions from the older generation and onto the vision statements. Please mute yourself if you're not one of the speakers. So we had hoped to have a younger organic dairy farmer who took over the farm from Kevin, but they're out busy farming. But we're fortunate instead to have a young compost farmer who's taken over the compost farm and farm from her dad. So here's Jane Seneca from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Liz. I'm really honored to be here. It's a real treat to speak at the 50th anniversary of NOFA. And I just want to say I feel like I've just gotten it so easy. There's so much groundwork that's already been set, and we're just in a perfect place for a beautiful momentum to start happening. So I'm blessed to have been born here and raised at Earth Care Farm, where my dad's goal was to create heaven on earth, and he's really done a magnificent job at that. So I'm here 44 years later with these lush, beautiful fields. We raise produce, we have cattle, but we're most well known for our high quality, large scale production of Merner's Gold compost. There's many beautiful, stunning places at the farm. I grew up driving the tractors. My dad proudly displays a citation I received for my underage tractor driving. I grew up fixing chicken coops and watching our animals give birth and seeds germinate, had room to explore and experience the swamplands and forests, pulled carrots out of the ground that were taller than myself, and just was surrounded by beauty with simple vases of flowers around the farm, handmade cloth napkins, all the beautiful, simple things that connect us to the rhythm and ritual of nature and brought excitement and meaning to my life that I'm only realizing now as I have a son. NOFA was also a strong part of our community. I grew up watching my dad prepare for NOFA speeches. I attended the children's events at NOFA. I always enjoyed the summer conference going as a kid, making tie-dye shirts and churning butter. And then I learned from so many farmers through NOFA in my teens and 20s, different techniques. And now I'm really just feel so honored to get to share lessons I've learned throughout those last 40 years. And I'll never stop being amazed by how complex, interconnected, and intelligent nature is. So that's my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next we'll turn to Steve Munno from NOFA in Connecticut.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks, everyone. My name is Steve Monno. I am a farm manager at Massaro Community Farm in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and currently serving as board president of Connecticut NOFA. And I did not grow up with farming. I grew up in a suburb on Long Island. I loved food and playing sports and being outdoors, but I had no connection to farming, no connection to gardens. I don't think I knew anyone who had a vegetable garden. You know, we had some shrubs and I raked leaves and jumped in those piles, but I didn't have an agricultural connection as a kid other than eating the food. And I loved food. And eventually I guess I came to farming through that love of food and interest in environmental protection and ultimately work in environmental education and wilderness exploration. So it wasn't until my early 20s when I started farming while I was working, teaching in outdoor education in Yosemite. I started helping a farmer where I was a part of that CSA at Foothill Farms. And then I had friends who went through the Santa Cruz apprenticeship in ecological horticulture. That led me to that program where I learned there and ended up working with the Food Project in Lincoln, Massachusetts before coming here to Connecticut. And I was sort of lucky enough to help start a farm here, Massaro Community Farm, which is established in 2010 on a farm that was formerly a dairy farm and had long been out of production, but the community here wanted to see it become an organic farm, producing vegetables, running a CSA, donating produce to hunger relief organization, offering on-farm educational programs and experiences for the community. So we've been here since 2010, and here I also helped start the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance, working with other young farmers across the state, and Connecticut NOFA kind of helped make that happen too. So, you know, when I moved to Connecticut at the end of 2009, NOFA was the first organization I reached out to. I talked to Bill Dusing, who was the founder here of Connecticut NOFA. I asked and learned about the farm landscape in the state and the farmers, the markets, the winter conferences. I went to my first NOFA conference in Connecticut and in Massachusetts and in New York, and was a regular at those winter conferences and at the summer conference in Massachusetts as well. And in 2012, Connecticut NOFA asked for young farmers to join the board, and I said I was interested, and I've been here engaging more and more and learning more about NOFA and with NOFA ever since.
Thank you so much, Steve. That's great. And now we'll go to New York City to Onika Abraham.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Onika Abraham. I use she, her pronouns. I am a lot of things. I'm a parent. I'm a partner. I'm also the executive director of an organization called Farm School Nyc. I'm based here in New York City. And I am a former board member with Liz Henderson of NOFA New York. I just stepped off the board, I think, last year. I want to say more about Farm School Nyc. Before I start, I feel like there are so many intersections. I've not met you before, Steve, I don't believe, but I'm like, I went to CASFAS. I also, went to these conferences, and I also grew up in New York City, where I didn't grow up on a farm and had a very different entree into this this beautiful profession that we're all in love with. One of the things that is different, though, I think, is that I'm actually the grandchild of 3 farmers. My grandmother farmed in rural Alabama and really grew everything that her family ate, everything except for flour. My grandfather was the one who grew row crops and did more of the kind of commercial scale, but my grandmother did all of the garden scale and just fed everyone. And I remember seeing her as an 80-year-old woman in her backyard wringing chickens' necks and all of that. So I really had a wonderful entree in, and really that was so strongly influential to me as a young person growing up in New York City, in the sense that it was a deep sense of community. And even though by outward measures, they might have seemed poor, the richness of community and of interdependence and of autonomy from the food system that I knew in my bones was broken in New York City, and the ways that my communities and low-income communities in particular were being disturbed. There was a richness in what was happening in my grandmother's yard that I fell in love with. And after going to college, I really decided to follow that dream and found my way into CASPAS and also into Farm School NYC. So that organization, Farm School NYC, the mission is to train New York City residents in urban agriculture in order to build self-reliant communities and inspire positive local change around food access, social, economic, and racial justice issues. And for us, how we do that is a comprehensive professional level training program, similar to CASPAS in some ways, but different in centering, in particular, low income Black and Brown folks who can't really necessarily take a year off to do a deep apprenticeship on the West Coast, the way that I had the privilege to do. And so that's one of the major differences. Another is that we've worked really hard to fundraise so that we now have a real gift economy around farm school. And so by that, we mean no one's ever turned away at this point forward for not being able to pay, even though it does cost quite a lot to run our program, about $10,000 a year per student. But we recognize the many ways that people bring wealth to our community by sharing their knowledge, by sharing their time, they're cooking for each other. They're doing, kind of ways of working together in each other's gardens. And so all of that is building this community and building wealth. And we recognize that and don't charge for our classes at this point. We're really committed to grassroots social justice. So again, we're really looking at ways that we're engaging in dialogues around the systemic issues that are creating the disparities of health and wealth that we're seeing in our communities in New York City. And we're really aiming to be accessible to all New York City residents and looking at the different types of scales of programming and ways of growing that are possible in New York City and our surrounded areas. So we do a lot of programming that is actually on farms and gardens outside of the New York City region and into our larger kind of foodscape up in the Hudson Valley, in New Jersey, and other areas where the farmers who feed us live. I think one last thing I want to share, and it's hard to try to get in who I am and like who we are in these short spurts, but we'll have more to share later. I just want to share that this concept of urban agriculture, so many people I felt in the Norfolk community sometimes think it's like this newfangled thing that is existing in this space. And I always say urban agriculture is as old as the concept of a city itself. People have always been growing food in cities, and it's no different now than it was then, in a lot of those very basic ways. And primarily the folks that have been pioneering that have always been the poor and the marginalized and often people of color, because we did it out of necessity. And the other thing that is really important to understand, especially in the sense of organic agriculture, is that so many of the folks who came into cities as migrants brought these traditions of indigenous communities and African communities that a lot of our organic techniques are based on. Really brought that into cities, nurtured that in cities, and corrected and ameliorated these soils that had been so polluted and degraded by urban zoning and all of these kind of systemic issues over time. So it's those organic practices that stem from these indigenous and African practices so often that sustained and created that beautiful vibrance that we're trying to see, or that we've been building and sustaining an urban ag for all of this time. So that's what gets me really excited, as you can see. And I'm excited to talk more after my last younger cohort member goes. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Onika. And then we'll go on to Iris Fen Gillingham of Wild Roots Farm.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's such a pleasure to see all your faces. And I am Iris Fen Gillingham. I use she, her pronouns, and I am inhabiting Lenape land right now. I was raised on a farm. My parents are Wes and Amy from Wild Roots Farm, so I grew up going to NOFA conferences, and some of my earliest memories are dancing around at the contra dances and doing some jigs and spinning yarn in the kids' rooms. And I grew up around this beautiful, thriving organic farming community, which has been very impactful. And I'm also the great granddaughter of a dairy farmer and great grandniece of 2 dairy farmers. So I have a lot of connection to land in upstate New York in my family. And I currently study human ecology at College of the Atlantic, which is basically all about humans and their interaction with their environment around them. So it is very convenient for me to have grown up on a farm that allowed me to have the relationship to the natural world. It's been such a learning experience for me because I grew up, and when I was 8 years old, we had landmen coming into our community wanting to frack for natural gas, which is not something that you want when you're trying to organic farm. So as a very young age, I got involved in activism, and since then have become a climate justice organizer and working in that realm a lot. And one of the things that started to bother me was how farmers were kind of made out to be this enemy, and how agriculture is causing climate change and agriculture is ruining the world. And I was like, wait a second, like all these organic farmers I know are actually providing solutions. They are adapting and working with the weather and the climate, and they are providing local economies for their community and food. And it just was totally different than this narrative around what farming is. And so I realized that I really wanted to shift that narrative and develop a deeper understanding for myself, even though I'd grown up on a small farm. So I am currently running a 9-week farm immersion program for college age students on Wild Roots Farm. And we're sharing knowledge about sustainable living, farming off grid, working with the land, rewilding, and understanding what it means to like be adjusting to these wet climate seasons that we're having now with climate change. And so my experience with growing up on the farm is something that I want to share with other young people to have a deeper understanding of where our food is coming from and how we can learn from farmers about the climate solutions that we can create. So that's what I'm doing right now this summer, and I'm very happy to be a part of this panel and connect with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iris. I think in the interests of time, so that we'll have some time for discussion at the end, I'm going to skip the most controversial of the questions and just pose the 2 that came from Mike and Joey. Mike said, how do you think you can leave things better than you found them? And Joey asks, what are you going to do to keep building NOFA as a way to build our community? And ask our 4 younger people to talk about what your visions are for the next 50 years. So Jane, if you would start, that would be great.
Sure. I'll talk about my vision, I guess, first. But yes, so farming is not easy. Nothing meaningful seems to be easy. But there's a deep satisfaction that comes with knowing and greeting your sense of purpose. I've recognized where I fit in the world, and that sense of purpose is so that I so readily get, we all here so readily get from farming, is what so many people are craving right now. So much so that we're in a resurgence of the Back to the Land movement. Young people are again getting that call back to the land, I think in bigger numbers than in any of the past times that this has happened. I have insider knowledge on this because the demand for our compost is through the roof the last 1.5 years, and many of our new customers are starting new farms or just started them in the last year. This pandemic has pushed people to follow their hearts. So I'm really envisioning a whole lot more of children growing up like me and Iris did, getting to be raised on small organic farms, And like these original founding NOFA members, these new farmers don't have a farming background. They're going to really need NOFA and its generous spirit of sharing knowledge and joyfully learning from each other. I could see NOFA's momentum snowballing at this moment, joining with other groups, such as the regenerative farming movement and the new no-till movement, especially as we get closer to having easy ways to measure produce nutrition and soil health. The essence of all these movements is to grow healthy food and create healthy society. And that is also the type of food that our society is craving right now. And farmers are continually getting better at understanding how to achieve high levels of nutrition through these farming practices. So this is super exciting to me. And we're all going to have to hold on to imagination because it's exactly what we need right now. You have to be able to imagine in order to manifest. Just working with the land really hones your imagination because you see what nature creates every day. I'm looking outside at these seeds I saved from last year, and there's 12-foot sunflowers out our window right here. It's a tiny monarch butterfly will pollinate your flowers and then fly 3,000 miles to its winter ground in Mexico. And in one handful of soil, there's billions of microscopic life. So it's there. So we just have to like keep our imagination sharp. If you can't imagine it, you can't create it. Let's continue to envision a better system, one that heals. Just like all these founding NOFA members, my dad embodies that imagination all farms need today. He imagined a farm system that processed what society considers waste into something that enlivens soil and makes food more nutritious. At the same time, this system created good jobs, places for wildlife to thrive, high production and beauty, and it gets better every year. I see it, I can measure it. I'm stubbornly imagining my role in continuing to honor our land and helping other farmers enliven their soils. I imagine raising my son to be comfortable in the world and cherish all life. I imagine you all joining me in stubborn optimism. I know it can be done because I grew up on a farm worthy of imitation. Let's continue in NOFA to support each other, to raise our children consciously and our farms with consideration for the next generations. In 50 years, I'll be 90. Let's meet back here at this conference and celebrate our healed relationship with Mother Earth. Let's give ourselves to this world so worthy of attention.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was beautiful. Steve, would you like to take up the control?
Thank you. So my vision and hope for the future, just in a very broad way, is that agriculture and the related food industries won't participate in any way or be in any way reliant on the exploitation of humans, animals, land, and ecosystems. It's a big ask, but as Iris said earlier, you know, most of the farms and farmers she knows are the solution, are doing the right things, and so we know that this is possible, and that change for those farms that are exploiting humans, are exploiting animals, are exploiting the land and ecosystems can make that change, and there are solutions there. So that's kind of the base of my hope for the future. And just noting that, you know, for a farm to thrive, people will ask, how's my farm doing? How's it going? Well, the people here need to thrive, not just the ecosystem and the agriculture. This needs to be sustainable for everyone who works here. There needs to be quality compensation and safe work conditions for all farmers. We need, you know, there have been reparations that have been called for by farmers of color and Native Americans, and this needs to be realized. We need the ownership of farmland to be returned and access of farmland returned and made possible to those who've been, the land has been unjustly taken. This needs to happen sooner than later, and my hope is that within 50 years that has been realized. And with that, we'll see the return of small landholder farms throughout the country to help create thriving local and rural communities. We need local and regional goals to manage the crises that we're in right now, like the COVID pandemic, and the ones and the climate crisis that we're in, and those that are in our future. So I'd like to see that breakup of large landholder farms to help local and rural communities thrive. I want to see the end of industrial extractive agriculture, the end of monocrop systems, and the end of fossil fuel use in agriculture. Climate change is one of our biggest threats, and agriculture can be one of our best solutions. We need local and regional strategies for food, fiber, and energy self-sufficiency. This is one of my biggest concerns going forward, and we can be the right response for this. We need stable food and water storage and distribution systems. Agriculture needs to play a role to make that happen, so that we can weather the crises ahead. And with that, there's not one solution for all that. The farm methods and practices used in one place, might not work elsewhere. So this is where agroecology comes in, understanding that wherever farming is happening, the methods and practices must respect the uniqueness of that place. And again, of course, that humans are part of that place, and the farmers must be part of that ecosystem and protected and cared for as part of that system. And so, to the question of how we can leave things better than when we found them, and what we're going to do to help, keep building NOFA, in the community, I'd say we have to keep doing what we're doing and remaining persistent. The founders and elders who have brought us here were persistent over the last 50 years to bring us to where we are. So, and hopeful and positive. And we need to continue the discussion and press the issues in Congress, in our states, in our chapters, on our farms, and in our communities. Overpowering as some of the industrial ag and corporate ag interests may seem, we have had significant victories over the years, as our 50-year history shows, and no doubt there will be more victories in the next 50 years. I could share little stories about, my Congresswoman, Rosa DeLauro, who's a phenomenal advocate for farms and has helped secure federal funds that made my own farm possible. Earlier this summer, Cory Booker reintroduced the Farm System Reform Act to crack down on monopolistic practices and invest billions into transitioning to a more resilient food system. There are potential victories. We do have allies. There are things that can happen within the legislative systems. Here in Connecticut, our State Department of Agriculture has helped direct funds through its grant programs to add infrastructure to help farms respond to the changing climate, both the ecosystem climate and also the regulatory climate. Our Yukon Extension has created a farm to school program to help expand access to nutritious and delicious Connecticut grown food for students in schools, and to help access markets for farmers. So there are I think there's lots of reasons to be hopeful, and we have to be persistent to keep that hope and to keep the victories coming, so that we can realize the just and resilient food system that we need in the next 50 years.
Well, thank you, Steve. That was great. Onika, I look forward to hearing your.
I wish I could just say ditto. I am so moved by this focus and the raising up of imagination as a critical resource in this movement and in our visions. That's so beautiful and so true. And Steve, when you talk about non-exploitation and non-extraction and all of those tenets that are so critical to moving this movement forward, it just like warms my heart. So I'm like so glad I'm in community with you. I think what I would say in addition to what's already been said is really speaking as a person of color on this panel, as a Black woman on this panel, I'm really thinking about the deep ancestral knowledge and ancestral history that I carry in my blood with me. And also just knowing that I am here as a representative in solidarity with a number of networks and a number of organizations that I'm in deep community with, and really wanting to lift up our collective vision. So I'm going to speak to that a bit. So Farm School NYC is one of 5 Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations in the Northeast that have come together loosely to form what we call a Black farming ecosystem in New York State. And that includes organizations such as Black Farmer Fund, which I am so blessed to serve on the board of, Corbin Hill Food Project, Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, Soul Fire Farm Institute, and a number of other organizations that we organize with. We have collectively come together basically around 2022 to explore ways that our work is already intersecting and to bring more intention to our collaborations and synergies. And we created this, what we call our North Star, which I think for me is so motivating. And it gives me this umbrella to operate under in terms of like the work that I do more on a local scale in New York City. And that is that we envision Black and Brown folks on land in right relationship with the land and with each other, and with all the support they need to thrive, shifting power and ownership in everything that we do. Our vision includes us in practice together. So working together in interdependence and collaboration, healing amongst our communities between Black and Brown peoples, and creating more possibility and choice for those around us and for those who come after us. And so our organizations are doing a number of different things to kind of move this work forward. We're freeing our people through nutrition and food and health, community, certainly through economic development and agrarian knowledge transfer, which is the sweet spot, I think, for Farm School Nyc. That's a big part of what we do. And looking at land access for Black communities in the Northeast, with an epicenter here in New York State. So our collective contributions around that Black liberation is including creating a really coordinated, streamlined pathway for Black farmers' success, supporting Black farmers to own and operate successful farms in the state, facilitating financial capital and land and social networks, educating policymakers. Steve, that's such a big part of the work that we need to do. And I think that the ways that we are doing this for Black farmers, there's a collective that we've created called Black Farmers United New York State. And we are working with other organizations, other collaboratives that are working on similar justice issues from different standpoints and with different communities, and how that coalesces together to really make our state and local and federal elected officials take notice is so important. So I feel like the work that we're doing as Black Farmers United, it just lifts up the work that we're doing in community with other organizations and other folks of other identities. We're really fostering collective governance and the ways that we're sharing decision-making around all of these financial instruments and things that we're doing. We're exploring and digging deep into cooperative development, which we feel is a way to hopefully correct some of the inequities that you talked about, Steve, in terms of the ways that people are denied ownership and land and power within the structures that we already have working within our food system. And we're really looking to connect Black farmers to larger markets, which bolsters local food systems, reduces our carbon footprint, some of the themes that we've talked about earlier. Lastly, I definitely feel like we are looking at increasing Black farmers' access to innovative and culturally relevant and climate resilient training and technical access. These are work that we're trying to do at Farm School Nyc in particular. And we're so excited about the intersectionality of that with other communities of beginning farmer training programs and things of that nature. So these are some of the things that we're lifting up, and again, as this kind of Black farmer ecosystem that we're working with here in New York State. And I love the way that this dovetails with some of the visions that others are lifting up too. And I think that there's this beautiful kind of like tsunami that we're building together in the ways that we're intersecting our efforts. So with that, Iris.
Thank you so much, Onika. Iris, go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, all I can do is just agree with everything that everyone has said. I think that one of the things I've been studying in school, and something that I have learned from growing up on a farm, is just learning about emergence and resilience. And with climate change, we are seeing that communities need to have the ability to develop resilience, to plan ahead, to mitigate and adapt, and to plant seeds metaphorically that are going to grow in this changing world. And all of those things are something that I think all of the groups and collaborations and people and farmers that folks have already mentioned are doing that. And farmers are planning crop rotations. They're looking ahead at grazing patterns. They're thinking about the seeds that they're going to plant, when they want to plant and harvest. And we're constantly getting now more and more erratic weather patterns. And we're learning, like I'm just watching my mom this year in her garden and working with this really rainy season that we've had and how to deal with that in a resilient way. Well, providing food security for our family and for all of the people that are learning on our farm. And I think that it just struck me that farmers are so much a part of the solution, that knowledge sharing and that practice of working in an emergent way and working with the land instead of against it. Like within our society, we're constantly using land as an object, a resource, extracting it, removing people from their land, taking land and selling and buying it as if it's just something that can be exchanged with cash. And that is not the case for me. I probably can, a lot of people can probably relate that the land is something that is alive and that is creating the life that sustains us, right? That we are a part of that, where I feel very tied to the land that I've grown up in. And I think that who I am is part of that. I'm named after wild irises and the fen that they grow in on my family's farm. And so this vision I have for the next 50 years is not just isolated to what NOFA is, but expands to what our whole encompassing country, world, like thinking about how we can shift people's relationships with the land by everything that Steve said about land reparations, by reconnecting communities that have been removed from land, by acknowledging the skills and knowledge of farmers and indigenous people and communities that are working with the land. So I just feel like part of my vision for the future is to have a reciprocal relationship with the land, with the community, and thinking of our farms and the land, the plants that we're working with as part of this community, not as separate, not as, oh, that's plants that I'm growing, but that is, those are the plants that are feeding me, that I am caring for, and that reciprocity that is our community. And I think as humans, we can learn a lot from just watching the natural world and learning how to adapt to what is happening right now, because it's really, if we don't try to work with it and adapt to it, then it can be very detrimental to our communities. And so I think, that kind of ties into the questions that Liz asked about how do we leave things better than we found them. I think that we are on that path, and every step that we take, we're taking that step for future generations. Every step that the older farmers have made to create NOFA has helped to give me the community of growing up and going to contra dances. As small as that might seem, like I have such fond memories of just like, being in that space where everyone has dirt under their fingernails and has that connection to a place that is so valuable in understanding where we want to go in the world. And the question of what are we going to do to keep building NOFA as a way to build our communities, I think that NOFA is a part of something that's much bigger. It's a part of we're reaching our climate goals. It's a part of creating the change that we need to see in the world. And we are already on this path of creating this incredible environment for young people like me to want to come back to our communities, to want to have relationships with the land, whatever that might look like, whether it's creating art on farms and, having activist retreats to learn about how to reconnect, or whether it's growing vegetables. There's so many ways that young people can build and develop relationships with intergenerational farmers and communities. And I think that the future is right here on this very Zoom and in all of the land that we all work with.
Well, thank you, Iris. That was beautiful. And looking over the chat, I haven't seen any questions. So perhaps someone does have a question. Does anyone have a question you want to ask? Because if you don't, I'll circle back to Kevin.
It looks like somebody does have a question for Kevin in the chat.
Good. Okay.
They were asking, what is your view of the Real Organic Project?
Kevin, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I would. I think the Real Organic Project may be one of the ways that we can continue to swing consumers to purchasing the proper food products. I'm on the board of the Cornucopia Institute, and they have what they call their scorecards. They're very helpful for helping consumers buy organic products that not only meet the standards, but the intent of the organic regulations. The problem is trying to get to a bigger audience, because nothing is going to change with these corporate entities until they start feeling it in their pocketbook. These people don't really believe in organic. The people that are using hydroponics, the people that are raising animals in CAFOs, the people that are feeding illegal imported grains that they know aren't truly organic. These people only worship money. And the only way things are going to change is if consumers start changing things with their purchasing habits. So I think the Real Organic Project is a good step in that direction, but it still needs more exposure. It's the same thing with Cornucopia. We toil endlessly trying to get the message out to people about how their food is raised, and that the true organic food doesn't have these hidden costs that conventional food does. The damage to the soil, the damage to the water, the really unsustainable way that animals are treated and that people are treated. And so the trying to wrap it up, yes, I think the Real Organic Project is a very good option. I was asked to be on their board when they formed, but I was dealing with some serious health issues at the time, and I had to decline. But I'm all in favor of what the Real Organic Project is doing.
There are actually 3 add-ons to organic. There's the Real Organic Project, there's Food Justice Certified, and there's the Regenerative Organic Certification. But I think all of those projects really hope to transform the organic program and bring it closer to the values that our movement as smallholder farmers holds dear all around the world. Would anyone else like to respond to that issue? Well, here's a question.
I could expound on it a little bit more, Elizabeth,
Sure,
if
go
it's
ahead.
okay. One of the things when we were first starting with NOFA in our early days, and the reason for the meeting in Row, and a lot of our meetings with NOFA New York when we were first meeting at people's houses with a distant past, was how can we spread the word? How can we keep growing the movement? And that's part of what Real Organic Project is about. But one of the things that was most effective back then was workshops at farms, getting people out to the farm and showing them that, yes, you can do this, and there's reasons for it. Workshops, not just at farms, but also at meetings, the annual meetings. And, so everybody has to work at it. It doesn't just happen. And that would be my message to the younger generation. If you want to be the change in the world, you've got to make it happen, because it's not going to without people behind it. So try to have farm tours, try to get people out to your operations, participate in NOFA's meetings and everything that they try to do, and try to get other people to do so too.
Heather Kent would like to hear more from Iris about wonderful ways to bring young thinkers to actually experience the land. Want to say a few more words, Iris?
Yeah, this is what I'm really excited about working on. And this is the farm immersion that I mentioned before is one of the ways that I'm working to do that on my family's farm, because we have the capacity right now to, have this educational program where we're bringing young students from around college age, and they're actually getting college credit to come and experience living off grid on the farm for 9 weeks, visiting and meeting other organic farmers in the area, like going to Will-O-Wisp and Gorczynski's farm, if you guys know those, in New York State. And I think that for me, there's many, I have a lot of thoughts on this. One of them is that I think we need to get more funding provided to farms to support internships, because I think there are so many incredible people who would love to come work on the farm, but many Black and brown communities cannot afford or have the resources to leave and not have a job for a whole summer or a whole season. And I think it's vitally important that we are able to kind of break down some of those barriers by getting funders. I was able to do a lot of fundraising for this program so that the students who were coming did not have to pay a lot of money, but that it also wasn't, like we weren't getting exploited labor. And I think that we did it as an educational program because that's what we had our capacity to do this year. But I think down the line, it would be amazing to be able to like pay a living wage to folks who are working on farms, and finding investors who are interested in supporting young people in developing these skills, because there are so many amazing young people who want to be able to reconnect to the land, but there are so many barriers in place right now. And so whatever farmers can do to offer educational opportunities, even small ones, even small farm immersions or part-time jobs, whatever that might be for young people, I think is extremely valuable. And it doesn't mean all of the young people are going to go into farming, but I think that for me, seeing more young people having an understanding of what sustainable agriculture is feeds into any kind of job or work that they do later on in their life, or even just how they spend their money and where they buy their food from.
Right. Thank you, Iris. I would like to ask Onika to comment on what seems to me a really important convergence between racial justice and climate justice. That the quickest way to solve the problems of the climate is not to invest in carbon markets and a carbon bank that pays the biggest farms to slightly raise the organic matter this year while depleting the deep organic matter, but it's by working with alliances between NOFA and the Black farmers and making sure that we see the transformation that Steve talked about, the reparations. But maybe Onika, you could comment on that more.
Yes. I also just want to co-sign on what Iris had to say about young farmers and new farmers. I usually use the term new farmers or young to farming, and just really appreciate what you're talking about in terms of the access to that opportunity. I also am really, really deeply passionate about people being able to learn on farms. And I love the idea of them being able to learn on farms that have people who reflect kind of their own experience. That's something that was sorely lacking for me when I was at Caspis, truthfully, and something that I'm really trying to do something about here in New York State. And that lack of kind of ability to fundraise and to be able to provide the infrastructure just to have people to stay on your farm for a season, let alone pay a living wage, is really, really lacking for a lot of Black and brown farmers in our region and probably across the country as well. And I think that nonprofits have a real role to play in trying to make up that gap, and philanthropy has a role to play in making up that gap, because it's really, really important also for folks to feel safe in communities where they're like sorely underrepresented. And for example, I'm working with a farm, my compatriots at Rock Steady Farm. We're having a pilot right now for LGBTQ farmers coming from the city into a very more rural space where there's very few folks of the trans folks kind of in that space, and just creating a space that feels really welcoming and supportive for them with folks that like understand their experience. So more things like that along these different identities is really important. So in terms of the kind of really thinking about the intersectionality of racial justice and climate resilience. It's a really interesting way to look at this, Liz. And I think what comes up for me around that is, again, looking at some of the ways that Black and Brown farmers have traditionally farmed, and looking back at our ancestral knowledge. And that's something that is a big part of the reclaiming I see happening in younger communities and folks that are new to farming. So much of those practices are really the bedrock of how we're going to do carbon sequestration and really make a difference in a lot of the work that we're doing. And I think what's exciting to me now is that there's a lot more intentionality to bringing the metrics and measurements that our scientists and the scientific method value, and also our legislators value, and our regulators value. We're starting to see some really interesting grants and projects that are starting to measure some of the ways that these traditional methods are really doing carbon sequestration in a way that is should really be lifted up, and how that's happening on these smallholder farms. This is also happening not just in the US context, but I think, speaking to Steve's mention of agroecology, that's happening in a lot of different smallholder farm communities. And I think that is getting me excited, because I think that data is going to kind of trickle up and start to change minds on a policy level to see the real importance of agroecology and the ways that in a lot of the ways that folks that are struggling around racial justice issues are leading the way and pioneering some of that, or just like hanging on the best they can to move that forward. So I'm hoping to see more of that trickling into policy soon.
You're muted, Liz.
Years ago, when NOFA started, it was a tiny group of scattered individuals. They got together, formed an organization, as well as many farmers markets, food co-ops. By 2019, the USDA Statistics Bureau counted 2,340 certified organic farms in the 7 NOFA states on 550,000 acres and almost $560 million in sales. How can we keep up this momentum? Jane, you want to say something?
I think that we are just at like an awesome precipice with technology. My dad and I do these like simple videos once a week, and it reaches like thousands of people. And I feel like people get excited about little things. If we can keep talking, like groups like NOFA keep talking and doing really well done little things that, although at first are digital, and then actually really get people to engage with the land, and really understand what's happening with soil and how exciting soil health is and nutritious food, that is just going to spawn like a whole continual excitement about truly healthy food that will keep that momentum going for the future. Just really just connecting people at a heart level, as well as like the food level as well. That would be my 2 cents to keep that going. Want to say anything?
Thank you.
I don't have anything.
No.
We just have a few more moments. Would you like to add to what people have been saying? Steve Munno, would you like a few last words?
Sure. Well, I'll just say, the momentum, I think, kind of keeps itself going in some ways. I mean, I'll say, in Connecticut, and I think throughout the Northeast states, the organic sector continues to be, the biggest growth sector, and that's really encouraging. And I can say, in my small little town outside of New Haven, 12 years ago when we started here, we were kind of the only, or one of the only small organic farms, and now there are half a dozen, maybe 2 dozen to a dozen more small, medium size operations. And it's just, I think the work that you all have done, the elders, and the work that we're doing, now people are seeing that and are encouraged, to take that step. And I think particularly now at this junction where we've seen in the last year, people are more willing to take that leap of faith for meaningful work that's going to have an impact on their community. And I think that momentum is building. Obviously it's been a really difficult year and a half, but we saw our CSA grow from 225 to 300 subscribers. We sort of missed out on restaurants and markets, but more people came to the local farm as a source of community and of food and of necessity. And I think people, we sold more seedlings than ever as people planted more gardens. There's just, in the crises that we've had, we've seen this return to the local in some ways. And I hope that continues. Out of the pandemic and out of this crisis, that momentum continues to grow in that way as well.
Well, thank you. Jason, do you want to close this out? We can continue talking after you kind of officially end, but I think we have a few more moments that we can share together.
Yeah, thank you for being sensitive of the time. I appreciate that. It is at our scheduled 8:30 moment here, and many thanks to the panel for contributing a very thoughtful discussion. Yes, I would like to invite those that are willing and interested in hanging on for a few minutes to maybe finish out with a couple of questions that this conversation could close out with. But at this time, there's some links in the chat that are asking you to fill out the evaluation for the conference and this session as well. There's also a reminder of the auction link and the vendor marketplace in the chat. I also want to remind you all that if you wish to save and download the chat itself to your computer, you can by navigating to the right of where you enter your chat. There's 3 dots. And if you click on that, there is an option for you to save the chat, and you can download these wonderful comments. And it's always wonderful to watch the comments as everyone's speaking. There's wonderful praise coming through and positive, uplifting words, which is really I think a hallmark of our community. And I appreciate everyone for being positive and optimistic and for joining. And I invite you to, if you're able to, stay for a few more minutes as Liz kind of addresses some final questions, and then we can wrap up. If you are in need of going, you can remember that this is recorded and you can catch the remainder on the recording. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jason. So a question that I would really like to throw out at people comes from something that Kevin said, where we really depend on consumers understanding and spreading the knowledge about organic farming and the food system. But my question is it enough to vote with your fork? Is there something more that we need to do in order to bring about the kind of transformation that would enable reparations, that would enable funding for many young people or older people to get a living wage while they learn how to farm and then have access to the resources for farming? Is voting with your fork enough? Go ahead, Iris.
I would love to hear what other folks think too, but I don't think so. I think that voting with your fork is vital to a certain percentage of change that can happen. But I think that there are many structural issues that must be addressed, and that can't just be addressed by people who are trying to buy at farmers markets. I think that there's policy change that has to happen, and there's more in-depth social justice change that has to happen that isn't going to just come from the people, but it's going to come from holding accountable certain institutions and structures within our food system and that communities are having to deal with. I think that it's really important that we don't just like this happens within the climate conversations all the time, where it's like, oh, what is your carbon footprint? And that puts the blame on the individual. And putting the pressure on individuals to just create all of the change is an entirely unfair advantage and does not address privilege, does not address all of these other things about just having the financial ability to vote with our fork. So I think that it also has to come from a lot of other directions.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address that? Onika, you look like you're bursting to say something. Steve, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Iris, just drop the mic on that as far as I'm concerned. I agree.
Steve, go ahead.
I agree as well. I guess I want to say, I want to say yes and no. I agree with Iris entirely. And I just want to say, whatever each of us can do is enough. I mean, I just want to acknowledge that it's if what you can do is vote with your fork, and you can't engage in legislation, then that's enough. It's just, we're all at different times in our life can engage in different ways. Not all of us, whether it's because of our family or our home, or whatever our situation is, we might not be able to engage in other ways than that. So, and as Onika pointed out in the chat regarding the WOOF program, I mean, legislation and activism sometimes is only available to people who have the privilege of time and money to engage in activism. And lots of meetings with legislators are set up, in a way that you can't get there unless you have a level of privilege. So, it's just inaccessible to too many people to engage with their legislators. So there may not be a way to do it. So I think, we all need to engage in the ways that we can. So voting with the fork is essential. And of course, making real change to the systems means engaging with our legislators and, locally and state and federally. But I think whatever we can do is each of us is enough. And when you can engage more, please do.
So does anyone else have a question or a statement, a vision you want to share? Joey, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to say that I come from a tradition of that everybody's got to help push the project along. None of us live to see it completed, but do what you can. I'm really with Steve on that, and encourage people to feel like they have some power. If the only thing you can do is get out in the street and make some noise with your pots and pans, maybe that's it. Maybe, capitalism's got a role, but boy, that's a big project. Capitalism does have intrinsic environmental destructive aspects that are really hard to get around. I mean, monetizing everything and seeing everything as what I can make money off of. And as Iris pointed out, that we really can do better than that in terms of our relationship with the world. But, make your contribution and take your rest and enjoy the company of the good people that you're working with. I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Joey. And thank you, one and all. If there's something that someone would like to say, a final few words for the good of the cause, or if not, we've shared some really wonderful thoughts and inspiration tonight. All right. Well, thank you, and good health and best wishes for everybody. And let's hang on for another 50 years.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night,
Thanks for the
everyone.
invitation.